Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim. This is another Real Ideal Gear review, and today I picked up my second Berny watch, the AM439M. It's a compressor style dive watch with bright colors. It has a blue rubber strap. This is not the typical Tim watch that I would order, but I thought I wanted to get something that had a little more visual presence on the wrist. It has a physical presence on the wrist just by the size and the diameter of the watch, and this watch definitely checks both of those boxes. It's a great watch. There's only a few minor things about this watch that I'm not real thrilled about. One of them in particular is kind of a head scratcher, but at the same time, this watch does a great job. So let's take a look at this watch, and we'll go through the 5 things we typically go through: size, fitment, finish, accuracy, legibility, and lume, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some conclusions at the end. But first, I want to just mention the design of this watch. It's a compressor style watch, which means the bezel is on the inside of the crystal, inside the case, and that by doing that, the dial itself kind of compresses down. Everything gets a little bit tighter. Things move towards the center of the dial of the watch. So your markers, your handset gets smaller. The markers move closer to the center. You just don't have as much room. And so one of the things I don't like about the design feature of a compressor style watch is just what it compresses, which is the dial itself where you're telling the time. So legibility can kind of take a hit on this one, but this watch really doesn't allow that to happen. There's a lot of great design features that go into this. So one of the things I really like about this is the visual presence on the wrist, which is the size of the watch. It's 42 millimeters in diameter, 13.5 millimeters high off the wrist. It is a chunky watch by those standards, by those proportions. And I have a video coming out very soon, if it hasn't already come out, on the proportions or the ratio that I like to go by when it comes down to determining if it's too chunky for me or if it's not too chunky for me to wear. And I tend to I want more of a lean looking watch on the wrist. This one doesn't do that, but I'm okay with that because I want that visual presence on the wrist. I'm going for that idea. Now, when it comes down to the fitment, this watch fits great. It has a great soft rubber strap. The blue color, I absolutely love it. The pin buckle is great. The one problem is the strap is too short. I've only got 2 extra holes at the end of this strap. I typically, on most watches, have 3, sometimes 4, depending on the spacing of the holes. But this watch only has 2 extra holes for me. And by doing that, that means the keepers have to be all the way in up against the pin buckle. So if anything slips, if the keeper slips further away from the pin buckle, then I'm going to start to have the end of that, the tag end of that strap start sticking out and maybe catching on things. So I wish the strap was a little longer. One more hole. This is not something I typically say about straps, is make it a little bit longer. Usually they're almost always the correct length for me. Plenty of space for keepers to hang on to things. But in this case, the keepers have very little to hang on to. Now, what about the finish of this watch? Well, you have some polish on the bezel, which provides a little bit of shine, which I absolutely love that. You've also got a little bit of polish on the chamfered edge of the top case, all the way along the lug. The rest of this is brushed. It has a really good tooly look, and because it's a chunkier looking watch, that brushed finish kind of takes over most of the look of this watch as far as the stainless steel case is concerned. Now, if we look at the dial, I absolutely love the dial. I looked at the different colorways that are out there, and I was honed in on this one for a couple of reasons. Number one is contrast for legibility, but the color combination on this one is fantastic because it uses the contrasting colors on the color wheel, blue and orange. And so I wanted to use that because it really helps distinguish the different things about this watch that are organized according to those colors. For instance, when you look at the bezel, the internal bezel, every 5-second markers are marked in orange, and all the 10-second markers are marked in white. So you can tell those. Also on the dial, you have that first 15 seconds that it's in orange. And just a great organization set. You have the minutes. On the minute hand has an orange inset to it. By the way, that's lumed orange as well. And that 15-minute dial marker, that stretch from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock, that's also lumed orange. I'm getting ahead of myself on the lume, but the idea here is the organization of this watch is fantastic. That's why I chose the colors that I chose. Now, the finish on the hour markers, I absolutely love them. They're white. They're very bright, high contrast against that blue dial. And it's kind of a brighter blue, too, because I'm looking again for that visual presence, a little bit brighter colors. You have the orange and you have the blue. These are not subdued colors. These are brighter colors. Now, one of the things I don't like about this as far as the finish goes is the small date window. And actually the small date window has to do with the compressor style design. So when you take that bezel and you put it inside the sapphire crystal, inside the case, you start to squeeze everything towards the center. And when you do that, the date window and the date wheel have to be smaller in order to fit. So that's just a consequence of a compressor style watch that has the date complications. So maybe next time I'll get one that doesn't have the date window, so I'm not annoyed by a date that I can't really read without my glasses on. I can just barely read it. Yeah, I can just barely read it without my glasses, but it takes a lot of time to get my eyes to focus in on it. So now the finishing on the handset is fantastic. The hour hand is just a nice white plain block looking handset, and the minute hand has that orange inset. The second hand is a very delicate orange arrow with a little syringe tip at the very end. It just, all three of these are just fantastically, it's great because it matches up with the color on the dial for certain reasons. So I just think it's great. Now, the legibility of this watch, we're going to talk about that in a second, is outstanding because of the contrast, but there's not a lot of writing on this dial. It's a very clean dial. When you start squeezing things together because of the compressor style, sometimes that writing starts to kind of crowd things as well, and the manufacturers want to have their brand and everything else that's in there. Great kudos to them for keeping everything very simple and keeping things very clean on the dial, especially with this compressor style watch. Now, if you take a look at the dial has some texture to it. If you look at the compressor bezel, the internal bezel, it actually has some raised markings on there for the 10-minute markings. And I think this is great because there's texture on that bezel. The internal bezel, I actually love internal bezels. I think they're very simple. They don't get bumped around. You don't have to run the risk of bumping them around or getting grit underneath them. And this one has a screw down crown. Now, I have a Bulova A15 Pilot. And one of the things I don't like about that one is that the timing bezels, the internal bezels they have, there's two of them, are not screwed down so they can be bumped around and moved because of the action of your wrist on those crowns. So to me, this is great. Screw down crown, you get the best of both worlds, and the finish on those is fantastic. I love the finish of these crowns. Now, what about the accuracy of this watch? Well within spec. This is a Miyota movement. It's an 8215. The one comment I'm going to make is the rotor on this watch is a little bit loud, so when it's really quiet, I can hear the rotor moving back and forth. And for those that notice the jingly-jangly bracelets or the rotor that makes a little bit of noise, this may not be the watch for you. But at the same time, it's like if you're wearing the watch and you're paying attention to that stuff, you're probably paying attention too much to your watch. Yeah, I look at it every now and then, but I'm not rolling this thing around by my ear to see if I can hear the rotor or the jingly-jangly bracelets, whatever that is. So anyway, I think it's great. Accuracy is good. Now, the legibility of this watch is outstanding. High contrast indices with a nice blue dial. Now, what about the lume? You got to love the lume. Take a look at this. Great colors, great lume duration. I love the whole setup is fantastic. I love the lume on this watch. And actually, this is probably the thing on this watch that is going to make me keep this in my permanent collection because I love the coloration. I love the bright colors during the daytime, and I love the colors during the lume and the low light and no light conditions. Overall, what are the positives? Well, you have 200 meters of water resistance, sapphire crystal with AR coating. You have screw down crowns. You have great finishing with just a little polish on the bezel and the chamfering on the top case. You have a great strap. Strap's a little bit too short, but overall, that nice supple rubber strap doesn't move around on my wrist at all, which I think is a little bit of a better strap system than leather. Yeah, it could be a little bit hot maybe, but at the same time, it gives it that summertime look, that outdoor summery look when it's a rubber strap, and it's a bright color set. The strap, the internal dial, all the colors that are there, just really makes for a great summer watch. Now, the things that detract from this watch, the small date window, the strap is too short, and frankly, it's a little too chunky. I wish it wasn't quite as tall off the wrist as it actually is, but that's the way it goes. So the overall score for this watch is a 9.7 out of 10. I think it's an outstanding value. I think it's a highly recommend. This watch is probably, and I say probably, almost certainly going to stay in my collection permanently because I just love the design. I love the look of this watch. I love the colors. It's a solid movement. There's so many good things about this watch. Now, if you're looking for a reviewed watch, check out my webpage at realidealgear.com. I have some of those watches are for sale. Some are limited edition, Casios, and everything else in between. So there you go. I'm looking forward to hearing or reading from your comments on this watch. Do you own a Berny? Do you have a compressor style watch? And what do you think of the compressor style watch? My name is Tim. It's been another Real Ideal Gear review. I'll catch you guys next time.